To start this thing off, y'all, let's have a moment of silence and followed by a serenity prayer. Serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. My name is Rod Costin. I'm an alcoholic. Ronnie, would you come up and read how it works, please? Didn't even know it, right?
I'm Ron Loggins, and I'm an alcoholic. Chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They're not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us, but there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines, The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if he were sought.
Thank you, Ronnie.
There's a hell of a bunch of people, isn't it? This started last year. It was 150 people, something like that, and now we come to this thing here. It's fantastic. I appreciate y'all for joining on this thing. I got one of the very favorite people I know on this earth came down from Arkansas for this thing. They sitting on the very front row in the middle up here, and this morning he says to me, he says, God, I can't wait to hear Johnny talk. And God, I want to hear Babs talk. But what I really want to do is hear Quincy. We got a guy tonight, y'all, that's kind of new at this thing. He hasn't done a lot of this thing at all. And he's kind of quiet and shy, introverted individual. And I want you to show him a lot of real East Texas patience and tolerance to his lack of self-confidence. But seriously, let me say one more thing just before I sit down and let me get started. I don't believe I'm alive today. I hate to say, God knows I hate to say this about him. I don't think I'd be alive today if it wasn't for him. And he doesn't know that, by the way. I got back in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1980. We were just talking about 1980 just now. I knew I was here for one reason and one reason alone, to save my job. Man, that was all. I wasn't an alcoholic. And he explains that better than anything in the world, that alcohol really wasn't my problem. And then I got in touch with his sponsor at the time, a guy that Johnny talked about, his papa. And he taught me about giving to my wife, expecting nothing in return. And those two things right there changed my life forever and ever and ever. So to those of you in here, including me, who are hobbled by the affliction of sobriety deprivation, I give you Clancy I from California.
My name is Clancy Imslin. I'm an alcoholic.
Hello, Clancy.
I got to save every minute now because I've been talking a little bit long lately, and sometimes I'm not done with my talk when they're dancing out there, and it really gets. But I'm very glad to be here tonight. Glad for this opportunity to come back to Tyler. I've been here a number of times over the years, and every experience that I've had in Tyler has been good, except one day many years ago when I came here to. I was going to go for a train ride with my friend Joe Leith, and on the way over here he had a stroke. And remember that day was one of the worst days of my life because it was raining and dismal, and he was in the hospital, could not talk, and we thought he was going to die. And his wife was so concerned, Mary, who's here tonight, and it was really a dreadful day. I had a bad day. But every other visit here has been very pleasant. Always enjoyed it. Always looked forward to it. Almost didn't make it today. The plane I was on this morning, the engine went out and they canceled the flight, and I had to scurry around. But I made a real effort to get here because I wanted to take part in this event. And I got here a little too late to hear all of Babs' talk, but I heard part of it. And she was such a persuasive and outstanding speaker that she made an invitation. I'm going to accept it. When I go to Al-Anon, I'm going to call her up, and we're going to go to the Addison Al-Anon meeting, and we're going to... You go there and wait for me. And heard Johnny, of course, and he gave a fine talk. And I'm really, it's an interesting thing that he speaks a lot, and he has quite a background. As has been said this morning, or this afternoon, the man that introduced him said that he was really a classic case of up from the streets, and that certainly is true. I'm also glad to see a lot of my friends here tonight, and a lot of met today, and some old friends that I've known for a long time, and a lot of new friends, and the gentleman from Little Rock, or from Arkansas, Want to hear Quincy? We haven't had much luck in America lately with people from Arkansas. I don't judge. But I was thinking as Johnny was talking today, it's an interesting thing that he and I are from completely divergent backgrounds. He was a street ragamuffin and from a drinking family of people who caroused and raised hell and went to whorehouses and jails, and I came from a very religious family of Norwegian Lutherans who didn't say any swear words, and who didn't drink, and who went to church and were good people. And he went to reformatories and terrible things, and I went to confirmation. I studied the Bible. Still remember my favorite Bible verse, Jesus wept. It's the one I memorized. But I learned to sing hymns in Norwegian while he was learning how to shoot heroin, and here we all wind up here all at once in AA tonight, and I'm his sponsor. And the only reason I'm his sponsor is not because I have any outstanding value or any worth more, but I just got here a couple of years before he did. If he'd got here a couple of years before I did, he'd have been my sponsor, and I'd have got him coffee today. It's just luck of the draw. But unlike many people in Alcoholics Anonymous that I've heard over the years, I never spent a lot of time over the years thinking about my drinking, because drinking was I never presumed drinking to be my number one problem. Once in a great while, maybe I'd have a terrible hangover, I'd be terribly sick, but I never really presumed alcohol was my number one problem, so I never really was obsessed by it. My problems were always considerably different. My problems were my feelings. My problems were as I look back and say, my perceptions of reality. But at the time, they weren't perceptions of reality. They are reality. That's one of the hardest things to understand, I think, for people like me and perhaps like some of you, is that's why there's such a fight in the world all the time. We talk about truth as though that were some specific thing. Truth is merely as the way I see it right now. That is truth. And if you see it different, you see it wrong. And that is the cause of all human problems all over the world. That's exact, because we always like to think that other people are doing it out of meanness and we're doing it out of right. Everybody believes that they're right. Everybody believes they're right. And it's a very difficult thing. And perception is a strange thing. And looking back, I can say, well, my perceptions were all wrong. But at the time, I didn't believe it. Someone would have told me. And maybe 5 years from now, I'll look back and say, what I said in Tyler, my perceptions were wrong. Who can tell? And you can't ever tell. That's the strange thing about being a human being. That's one of the reasons that people like me keep going to AA meetings and keep taking these actions. Not because I think I'll get drunk, but to keep my perceptions in the same area. Because I see people again and again who stay sober but stop doing these things, and their perceptions change. The same things begin to look different to them. AA looks different. The people look different. The world gets to be full of dummies and crapheads, and they get irritated, and they're not pleasant to be around. And I find that very easy in my life to get like that. And so I want to keep active, to keep my perceptions good. That's why I do these things. I'm not a wonderful man, nor am I a wonderfully highly motivated, saint-like person. I'm a guy who, left to his own devices, finds life intolerable, and the people in it intolerable. But much of my life has been spent in battling what seems to be the unfair breaks I'm getting out of life from the world around me. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time talking about my emotions and how I felt about things. And to kind of make it a little more succinct tonight. Maybe 3 general areas in which I would presume that, in looking back, were major areas of my life. Now, I didn't identify these things as I was going through them. I just felt them. You know, that's kind of I've used this analogy before, I guess, but I know there are new people here. And you will hear again and again when you go to AA, old-timers talk, and they'll talk about what happened to them, and it just makes you sick because they seem to know of everything. Well, and then in 1959, I realized that this was going to happen. And in 1961, I made a decision to do this. And then, you think, God, what an organized life. How do they do it? It isn't that way at all when you're living through it. I'm a kind of a Civil War buff. A few years ago, I took my son, who at that time was 11, to Gettysburg. I gave him a long lecture on the Battle of Gettysburg, much better if you'd get longer than you get from any guide. And I must have given him 2 hours, and I really just gave it to him. And I wanted him to know all about it. And I got done, and I looked down, and the kid was just, "You really know a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg, Dad." I said, "I know more about the Battle of Gettysburg than anybody who fought in it." But that really was true. I know a lot more about the Battle of Gettysburg. All the people who fought in it, I know. I read books, what everybody was trying to do. I know what Lee was trying to do. I know what Hood was trying to do. I know what Ewell was trying to do, what Meade was trying to do. I knew what colonels were trying to do. And the people who were in the battle didn't have this information. All they said was, "Oh, Jesus, here they come again." And that's really the way it is in AA. We all talk knowledgeably about what it was like and what I did then. But when we lived through it, we were just like you. "Oh, Jesus, here they come again." Life is just one series of the wrong end of the stick, one again and again. But I would say the feelings, one of the major feelings of my life that I couldn't identify when I had it, but it was with me most of my life, is a feeling that somehow, in some way that I can't really identify, and for some reason I can't understand, people treat me as though I'm not quite enough, like I'm not quite good enough. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what part of me is missing. I can't put my finger on it. But I know that all things being equal, they seem to like each other better than they like me. And they seem to get along better than they get along with me. And there are people who like me, but they're not the people I want to like me. The people I want to like me are the people who don't really like me very well. And I always know that if people get too close, they will realize that I'm not good enough and they will not accept me. So when I was a young man, I guess, without being aware of it, I began to develop little techniques and methods that many people do, I guess. Little games that you play, mental games, little smart aleck games, little mouthy games, to keep people at a distance so they'll never get close enough to know that I'm not good enough. Another great emotion in my life is that I seem to be subject to a lot of fear, intermittent fear. And it sometimes just comes out of nowhere, and sometimes it's just a low-grade unease. And I always felt if I could really get to be something, if I could be successful, then this fear would go away. But I became somewhat successful. And the fear intensified because now there was more to hide and more to disguise and to not let them know that I was faking it. I thought I was faking it. I now know much more about life when I know that I wasn't faking it. I was doing a better job than the other people around me. But as far as I knew, I was comparing my insides against their outsides, and I wasn't doing it good enough. And the other feeling that's always a major feeling in my life is that it just seems to me my antenna are out there too far. I can sense rejection, and my feelings are being hurt much of the time. Much of my life has been spent with hurt feelings. And when my feelings are hurt badly enough, I do terrible things such as quit jobs and cut off relationships and tell people I love to stay away from me because you hurt my feelings, and on and on. And I've done a lot of things. Talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face. I've done that again and again and again and thought I was absolutely justified. And these, a whole bunch of other feelings. but I never identified what they were. I just felt them. I always felt I was kind of too sensitive somehow. No insulation. I feel things too intensely. So as a young man, I wanted to do something about it. And so I went to psychoanalysis. And they say you shouldn't go to psychoanalysis. Some people say that. But I loved psychoanalysis. I made breakthroughs that would just make your tears run down your cheeks. I discovered why I had bad feelings a lot of the time. You know, for example, I grew up in a little town called Eau Claire, Wisconsin, that I've tried to make famous over the years. And it's a nice little town, nowhere near as big as Tyler, but it's a nice little town. And it's a Norwegian Lutheran community, like towns down here, kind of Southern Baptist communities. That's a Norwegian Lutheran community. I understand there's one Norwegian Lutheran church about 15 miles from here. Where is that? I must get over there sometime. Where is that? Anybody know? How? Athens. No, that isn't it. Shut up. Someplace. Sorry, Don. It's okay. I got my expenses. To hell with you. Get out of here. That's the way it is in AA. Somebody extends a hand of friendship, and my job is to bite it. Don has really been a good host. He met plane after plane till I finally got off of one today, and I should be very grateful, and I'm ashamed that I'm not. Well, but I grew up in the Norwegian Lutheran Church, and it's, you know, my grandparents were big in the church, my parents were big in the church, and it's a wonderful church. It's a strong church. We were in the majority. They really only had two major rules, as far as I could tell. You don't sin, and you don't monkey around with Catholics. That's about all, you know, no big deal. And as I grew up, that seemed right to me, except as I got older, I realized there's something different. I need more fun than these people do somehow. I don't know why. So I, little by little, got to sinning. I didn't mean to, but I did. And then I got monking with Catholics. And then I got sinning with Catholics. Well, and so I knew it was all over for me, really, but I never blamed the church. It's just that I was a different different breed. And years later in psychoanalysis, can you imagine what I discovered? I discovered that the Norwegian Lutheran Church had psychologically repressed me as a child. It had psychologically scarred me very deeply. Can you imagine how that feels to know that your own church that you always had respect for has psychologically warped you? I went into a terrible funk. As I've said many times, if I knew then what I know now, I would have formed adult children of Norwegian Lutherans. We could have hired a couple codependents and sat around and been pissed off every week. I discovered I'd been hurt by the Depression. Didn't even know there'd been a Depression. I discovered all sorts of things. I used to just leave there, just think, my God, no wonder I'm screwed up. But years later, I used to wonder, why did I like psychoanalysis so well? I mean, it really was a job. It took a lot of money. I had to drive a lot of miles because I didn't want the people in the town I was living in to know that I was goofy. And when I got there, I never got any good news. It was always something bad, something new, terrible thing that had been done to me. And I never knew why I loved it so well. Just the last 4 or 5 years, maybe, have I really begun to understand what psychoanalysis did for me. I began to understand it because I've seen other therapies, which are now established in America, which are doing the same thing for their patients that psychoanalysis did for me. And what they did for me was something remarkable. Because one of the greatest problems I've ever had in my life, and I can joke about it, but it was always there, a low-lying, intense guilt. Because once you've been raised straight and you go bad, there's always guilt. Now, John talked today about having guilt in his life, and he didn't even, he had a ramshackle growing up. So you can imagine when you're raised to know that it's either good or hell, and you know that you're going to hell, you can joke about it all you want, but every once in a while when you feel bad, you know, but I'm going to go to hell. And you can't live with that knowledge very well. And guilt is a terrible thing to get rid of. The only thing I've ever found that got rid of it was a few drinks. That's one of the reasons I drank. At least temporarily gets rid of guilt. And it turned out, and looking back, and I can see now, psychoanalysis got rid of guilt for me. It was a wonderful thing. That and alcohol is the only thing that got rid of guilt. And I'll tell you how you can get rid of guilt, and how these therapies do it today. And they do it effectively. How you get rid of guilt: you accept the role of perpetual victim, that you are the victim and all of this has been done to you by forces beyond your control. And it sounds kind of silly, but it really is it's the crux of most of these types of therapies. And they did it to me. They hurt me. They ruined me. They destroyed me. Whether they meant to or not, they just did, and they should be punished for it, and on and on. But it gets rid of guilt. It makes you feel free, I'll tell you. There's only one little problem, and you don't see it at the time, you see it in retrospect again. That is, there's nothing in this world that's ever free. Anything you get that's good, there's always a little price tag for it. And there's the three little obscure price tags for victimization. And it continues to be this way today as it always was. One, whether you intend to or not, you must sustain and enhance resentment towards the people who have done this to you. If you ever go to some of these therapies, these professional ACAs and these inner child therapies, you will find no one in those meetings smiling, because they are reinforcing resentment. And you don't see them leaving the meeting smiling, because it's, whether they intend to have it that way, it is that way. And it's because it almost gets, I've been in some of the meetings, it's almost a contest to who's been hurt the worst. And it isn't funny at all, it's really quite lethal. And the second thing you must pay, in addition to this continual resentment, is that you must accept the fact that you are terminally different. That no matter how many changes you make, you've already been grown in a weird position and there's no way out of it. It's like taking a tree and warping it as a sapling and watching it grow crooked, then say, no, now I know I'm crooked, but you can't straighten it. It's too late. And my life has been ruined by these forces, and it's too late. I'm different. I can pretend not to be, but I really am. And the third little price tag you have to pay, which is a very natural one, intermittent and intense self-pity, because I know I could have had a happy life if it hadn't happened to me. If they hadn't ruined, if I would have got the love I needed, if I would have got the understanding I needed, if I would have got the nurturing I needed, I could have been something. But instead I'm just going around always in trouble and people don't understand. Now, those are the three little things you must pay to maintain the role of incessant victim. And you may think, well, that isn't too bad. Maybe it's worth it to get rid of guilt. Pay those three little things to get guilt, because guilt is a biggie. And maybe it is for many people. Maybe it is for people in these therapies. But since, in the last few years, since I've been in this organization, and little by little understanding the nature of my illness, what made me get here, I understand from that big blue book called Alcoholics Anonymous, it specifically states the three most lethal emotions for people such as me: resentment, self-pity, and feelings of difference. And why are they lethal? Because they continue to justify my drinking on a continuing basis. Because it's not my fault. And no one really understands. And I'll bet you that of the people who die from alcoholism today, and it's estimated that perhaps 96% of alcoholics in America still die drunk, 95%. They die convinced it wasn't my fault. And it's a lethal thing. But I didn't know at the time. All I knew is psychoanalysis made me feel better, and it enabled me to get rid of a lot of guilt. And I read books, and I tried to be I was an imitation intellectual, and I read books I couldn't understand and read German philosophers that didn't make sense. What the hell is all this about? But if there's people looking, you can't do that. When there are people looking, you say, how true. I did a lot of things. But the thing that helped me most in my life, that's helped me function for year after year, was something I never really paid much attention to. When I was a boy, 15 years old, John had already been in reformatories and in trouble a number of times, and I was just an innocent boy in high school. When in a fit of either patriotism or neurosis, I ran away from home, hitchhiked to San Francisco, lied my age, was on a ship in the Pacific. The day before my 16th birthday, some seamen, men, said, "You want us some whiskey?" And I told them, I didn't say anything. I didn't want it because I'd promised my mother I wouldn't drink, and I promised my father I wouldn't drink, and my grandmother. And drinking was nothing that I wanted to do. I'd had some beer, and not just sour, I didn't like that. But they intimidated me. They made me feel as though if I didn't drink it, I wouldn't be a man, and I wanted to look like a man, because I really wasn't at all. I took a drink of whiskey, and it made me so sick, and I threw up, and they laughed at me, and I remember that. What I can remember about that is the ridicule. I don't suppose there's any single emotion that is more painful to people who feel inadequate than public ridicule, public humiliation. If you had a gun, you would shoot people right then, I'll tell you, just that instant. To this day, it sounds a little odd, but I'll tell you how strongly I feel about that. The people I sponsor, if I have any say about it, they do not own handguns. Now that sounds funny, doesn't it? But I remember years ago, 2 different people in AA, in a one moment of rage, grabbing a gun and doing something they wouldn't have done if they had to go across the room to get it. They never would have gone out and bought a gun to do it. But that instant of rage, and the same reason I don't want people that I sponsor, if they can help it, to have whiskey in the house. I mean, I've had my daughter married, and I've had champagne all over the house, but I kept it in the garage because I wanted cold air to hit my face because in a moment of rage, an old friend of mine named Eddie Regan, a friend of Johnny's, many years sober. He and his wife were having a terrible knockdown battle. And he was sober and sponsored people, secretary of a group, out in the kitchen getting a cup of coffee, listening to her nag him. She said something that particularly offended him. He got so upset, humiliated. He saw her bottle of gin up there. Shut up! Bang, and away he went. He wouldn't have done it 10 seconds later. But if you can reach it and do it, I know that people like me have flashpoints sometimes that you have there's no adequate defense against what you're going to do. It doesn't last long, but when it comes, it is like igniting TNT. But that's why I felt they laughed at me, and so I made a point to try to hold a drink down. I snuck into that guy's sea bag day after day, and nobody's around, take a drink and try to hold it down, and just hated it, make it throw up and wipe it up. And one day I held a drink down, and it's just terrible. And all of a sudden I felt significantly better. And I didn't read anything into that, I discovered something else. There's a book out that says, everything I ever need to know I learned in kindergarten. That's a bunch of baloney. I never learned anything in kindergarten. I couldn't even learn to sleep on my rug. Just hideous. Where you learn things, you're in your teens. Many people learn about drinking, and you learn about smoking. On that same ship, I had my first cigarette, and it made me sick, and I smoked another cigarette until I could finally smoke, and I smoked 2 packs a day for the next 42 years. And you learn, if you're a young man, you learn about lust in your teens, and you learn about love, and you learn that you have to disguise lust as love, and you learn that your family won't support you indefinitely, and you learn you have to go to work. You learn all sorts of things. You learn about life. And I learned a lot of things. And I didn't become a terrible old drunk. I just learned, like everything else in my life, try to learn it and handle it and bounce up and do it again. At the end of the war, I was at the Naval Hospital up in Pleasanton, California. Sewed up, and They came around at the end of the war and passed out some tests they had left over, and I didn't pay much attention to it. I just felt good that day, and for some reason, I wrote their little test. And I really did good at it. I felt good, and I didn't know what the test was for. And they came back a week later, and they said, "Oh, Clancy, we're so proud of you. You got the highest score of anybody." So what, But it turned out that they were tests from the Armed Forces Institute, and they gave me a high school diploma, an equivalency diploma, which I never paid much attention to either, except I look back now and think that literally changed my life. Because if I hadn't done that, I'd have had to go back to Eau Claire, Wisconsin after the war and start my junior year of high school over again. And I never would have done that in 1,000 years, because I was an entirely different person by now. But instead I was able to go to college. I went to college, became the first class of veterans after the war, and we all stood around the campus and tried to look like steely-eyed, sex-crazed killers. And I got married in college, because that's what a lot of veterans did. I met this girl with black hair. It seemed exotic to me in a Norwegian Lutheran town. Turned out she was a Catholic, and by that time I was hooked. So we got married, and she began turning out small Catholics. But became my second career. I remember talking to her years ago saying, in the late 40s, can't we use birth control? No. I think about that now. I don't know what I'd have done if she'd have said yes, because it's hard for you young people to realize this, but in those days, nobody ever mentioned the condom word ever. It would take some guy with bigger cojones than mine to go into a drugstore and say, the real tough guys would go in and say things like, "Hey, give me some cigarettes." And some condoms. Today it's a lot different. At least the thrifty drug by my house, these kids come and say, "Hey, give me some condoms." And some cigarettes. I guess that's progress of a sort. But I got out in the world and I became a sports writer, a newspaper sports writer. Then I had to get more kids, so I got in advertising and public relations and worked on being successful. And all these years I drank. And drinking was a great help to me. Drinking always made me feel better. It always made me feel significantly better. Drinking was just a friend of mine. It's one of the pleasant things I found along the way. Alcohol is the best friend I ever had. I'm sure if you're new, you may think that's a terrible thing to say in an AA meeting, but it really is true. To this day, it bothers me when I hear old fools get up at the podium and say things like, "That damn alcohol. It was poison from the very first drink." It's like hearing somebody badmouth an old girlfriend of mine, Just a minute. She may be a beast now, but she didn't used to be. Alcohol, when it worked, it just worked fine. It enabled me to do a lot of things. I just loved alcohol. In looking back, I didn't have any idea then, but again, with the knowledge of retrospect, I now know what alcohol did for me. To all intents and purposes, it took a person who didn't feel like they were quite enough, and for periods of time, made me feel like I was more than enough. What a great thing that is. It took a person who had a lot of fear of one kind or another, and made me, for periods of time, fearless. It took a person like me who lives with hurt feelings and always sensitive to rejection, and moved me for a period of time from rejectee to rejecter, which doesn't sound like much, but boy, what a difference that is in your life, to be the one who has the confidence rejecting others for just a little while. I'm sure that the best example of that is an example maybe you said 1,000 times, but I still don't know another better way to put it. I'm sure some of the guys in this room have felt it, sitting late at night in a bar, having a few drinks, watching a literal miracle happen in front of your eyes, watching some old beast become beautiful. Maybe you can talk with your shoulders a little bit. I might sidle over to such an old queen, closing time, imply there will be delights beyond her comprehension. Would you like to join me in the old Chevy? Now, if she would say, no, I don't know what I'd do if I were sober. I suppose I'd kill myself, but I wouldn't be in there if I were sober. But when I've had a few drinks and she says, no, I don't feel rejected. I feel sorry for her. Too bad, bitch. Don't come begging tomorrow. Boy, that is a great feeling to have once in a while when you're a wimp. And the only problem I ever had all these years, alcohol made me a better father, a better worker, better writer, a better husband, seemed to me. And the only, in fact, I was thinking a while back. Now, this is going to sound strange, but I literally believe this to be true. For several years after my marriage, for most of my marriage, I don't recall ever comfortably having sex with my wife unless I'd had some drinks. That's how strong that ethic is. That you can have sex, but you can't. It isn't really comfortable. You have to have drinks to do it. That's why I think a lot of people like me, you have two speeds. You're good or you're bad. There's nothing in between. And a few drinks can give you a release. And the only problem I ever had with drinking is that sometimes, unfortunately, I drink too much. Or as I like to believe, many times I have been thoughtlessly overserved. And when that happens, I have a tendency to become a little bizarre sometimes. And when I become bizarre, unfortunately, I get in trouble. And I never could understand why I became bizarre. And I suddenly realized on psychoanalysis, I've been repressed like a chained Prometheus. And alcohol has released me to my full size, that's all. But I never could convince a cop of that argument. I just, shut up and get in the car, for Christ's sake. So I always had a little trouble, and so I was sent to my first AA meeting in 1949. That's a long time ago. A lot of you little snots weren't even born. We love you. And it was, I was 22. 22 is not terribly young today in AA, but then no one had heard of anybody within 15 years of it in that whole state. And there must be a girl machine in there turning out girls. Send me 3. I don't know why I say things like that. It's this Tyler tap water. You can't see through it, but it's good. And the people in AA were old people, 40, 45, 50, and but they told me about AA, the same thing. If you're new tonight, you're hearing about AA now. I'm sure you're hearing the same thing I heard. You come to AA if you're an alcoholic. An alcoholic is a person whose problem is alcohol. Number one problem is alcohol. You come here, you stop drinking, you clean up your act, and your life gets better. And I tried it for a little while, but it became obvious that wasn't my problem. I have a lot of different things than that. And so I didn't stay very long. I came back again, didn't stay very long. And later on I went to psychoanalysis, and I tried other therapies for the next few years. From time to time I went to AA when the heat was really on. And AA is a nice place, full of a lot of people, but it's full of alcoholics, not like people like me. People like me the major difference, if you're kind of new, it may sound, maybe you'll understand this. is a person whose problem is alcohol, and therefore they have a lot of problems as a result of this. And the difference between they and me is something, it looks the same, but it's much different. I have a lot of problems, and therefore I drink. It looks the same to the naked eye, but it's a 180-degree difference. And I know I'm not an alcoholic, really. And I sometimes think about that because today there are so many young people. You know, in my home group, it's a big group, and we have a lot of young people in our group. And I'm sure if you're like you young people in this audience tonight, a lot of young people here, and I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but you should know that if you're like the young people in our group, you are the AA leaders of tomorrow. And if you're like the young people in our group, I'm going to tell you something else. I'm really glad I'm going to be dead. Jesus, you're right, idiots. Well, weird. Nothing personal, it's just that there's an AA leader of yesterday. No more ice water for Don, he can't handle it. Now I've lost my place and I'll have to start over. My name is Clancy Immelslund, and I'm an That's the way it is with the memorized talks. But over the years, I had some successes and downs and had good jobs. Once upon a time, the only time I ever sincerely made a real effort to stop drinking, I had a good reason for it, and it was right here in Texas. I lived in Texas then. And I'd been in jail in a different city. One night I got in a fight with a cop when I was in jail, and my son died while I was in jail. And if I wouldn't have been in jail, he would have still died, but it didn't ever seem like that to me. It seemed that was God's punishment to me. And I took a little vow on his casket that if there were children needed to be taken care of, I would never drink no matter what. And I was living in Texas then, and I was at the UTEP out in El Paso. I was working there at night, and I was working daytime in an advertising agency. I was writing a weekly little thing for the newspaper. And it's a new town. I was trying to make it go, and I brought my family in. My kids were there, and it was hot. And I had these 3 jobs, and I just started after a while, I couldn't drink. I just couldn't stand it. It just got so bad. I had to have something, and I just bursted with emotions. And I loved my children, but I wanted to just slap them out of the way and leave me alone. And everybody, and I almost went crazy, almost went insane. And one day my wife took the children to church, and I felt, I can't drink, so I've taken a vow on John's casket, but by God, I can get out of here. And I pulled a car in the garage and hooked up a hose and shut the door and turned on the motor and went to sleep and died. And a neighbor watched this happen, and apparently saw I didn't come out and came over and kicked down the door and pulled me out of the car, and they beat on my chest and rushed me to the county hospital, El Paso County Hospital. They pumped oxygen into me and for 2 days, then they transferred me to the psychiatric ward and talked to me for 2 weeks and determined I had deep psychological problems, psychiatric problems, schizophrenic, paranoid schizophrenic, and they committed me to the Big Spring State Hospital for an indefinite period up to the rest of my life, till I got better. And I'll tell you something, that's how I get when I'm sober. That is not what I want to be like. And I had a terrible time there, because I was there about 2 weeks, and all of a sudden I started to feel better, and I thought, what am I doing here? So I escaped, and they brought me back. You cannot escape from the Big Spring Hospital, State Hospital, because they can see you running for 3 days. You just... and you're out there in your white bathrobe, and just... and it's just a matter of time till the field glasses pick you up. Well, there goes that little Yankee sumbitch now. And they gave me 2 electric shock treatments a week for the next few weeks. And after that, you never try to run again. You just... And I might never have gotten out of there, except that when I got off shock treatments, I started to get a little bit, some of my sense come back. Oh, poor hunchback guy. You're supposed to be up ringing those bells. And they saw in my record that I had directed a grand opera at the University of Texas at El Paso. So they allowed me to direct the Christmas pageant at the Big Spring Hospital that Christmas. It's not a very complex production. The director's main job was trying to hold the three wise men off the Virgin Mary, if you possibly could. You know. Get back, Lamar. And of all things, I'm going to tell you something funny. This is not very funny, but it's just something that I ran across yesterday, I think. When I was there, a man named Les Ross had a feeling that he could help people with drinking problems in the hospital if they would give them just some little part of a ward to use. And they had no such thing in Texas then. So he apparently had been working on this for months. But while I was there, they gave him one little end of Ward 9, and he started the first alcoholic ward in the state of Texas, the state hospital. An experiment at Big Spring Hospital. And later on, he did so well, he had such success with some of these people, that they little by little moved it to other hospitals. That's where the whole hospital system came from. And he was turning out winners because all he ever did was have meetings and talk about the steps and getting the meetings outside. And then he became head of the hospital system for the state. Another guy became director of that hospital alcohol problem. They gave him a whole ward. They had wards Wichita Falls, they had wards in Terrell, everywhere. And over the years, then some of the administrators in Austin said, these people who are running these wards, I'm sure they're well-meaning, but they have no alcoholic education. They have no certification. And they eased him out. And they eased Les Ross out. And they eased Shelby out. And they eased the director of the Terrell Hospital out. And they brought in technicians and counselors. I used to go to Big Spring every year and talk to their alcoholic ward from my experience, because I was one of the few who ever came back to explain that there might be a way out. And the last time I was there was 2 years ago, and there were 24 patients, and there were 32 technicians and counselors. None of them attended my talk, because they already knew much more about alcoholism than I did. And the sad thing is this: as a result of the very bad performance of all the hospitals, in June they are closing down all the alcoholic wards in the state of Texas. So it's come a full circle, where Les Ross went in to save people, Alcoholics Anonymous members save people, counselors and technicians pushed those old fools out of the way, and now there is no help in the Texas state hospital system for alcoholics. There's a moral there somewhere, boy, I'll tell you. But I was there when he was starting, and I'd been around AA about 6 or 7 years by this time, failing, and I knew how to act like an AA, so I said the things he wanted to hear about me being an alcoholic. And I got transferred finally to the alcoholic ward, and eventually I got out of the hospital as a recovered alcoholic. And the funny thing is, I never had another drink till I ran out of Thorazine. And the next year I was in Dallas, and I was working in one of the biggest jobs of my life at Tracy Locke, working on the LC and Elmer ads for the Borden Company, the old LC the Cow, and brought my family in, had another baby 9 months and 10 seconds later, and everything went well, but eventually it exploded like they always exploded. The next thing I knew, I was running away. My wife finally took the children and left me for good, and it all had gone. I'd been successful failure. Now I was a failure again, but there's no more success. Found myself in jail in El Paso briefly. I went back there to try to hustle some money. Next thing I knew, I was in the Phoenix, Arizona drunk tank, and the guy woke up in the morning, a guy had just kicked my front teeth out. He says, "You vomited on my bunk, you drunken bastard." And I That was one of the few mornings that I was really glad I'd been in psychoanalysis, because once you've been in psychoanalysis, you get some perspective. At least that morning I was so sick I couldn't move my head out of the way of his shoe, but I was almost instantly able to identify his problem. I remember thinking, this son of a bitch is overreacting. And 3 or 4 weeks after that, I found myself being thrown out of the Midnight Mission on Skid in Los Angeles. The guy said, and stay out of here, you bum. And I tried to explain to him, I'm not a bum. 3 years ago, I directed a Grand Opera. Ads that I helped write. Elsie and Elmer ads are running this very week in Life and Time and Collier's and Certainty Post. I've had my picture in the New York Times for achievement. How many people do you know have had their picture in the New York Times for achievement? But it's hard to explain these things in midair. And when you have no front teeth, you can't hit those consonants quite as cleanly. But I stood outside of that Skid Row mission, and I'll tell you something. If a guy had come up to me and said, hey, pal, your life is at stake. I got to have the correct answer to this question. Are you an alcoholic? If my life were at stake, I'd have to say the truth. No, I am not, but I wish I were. I wish I were. I wish my life were simple enough that that would happen. Instead of having all these feelings and doing all these things that have been done to me, and no matter what I try to do, it's too late because I've already been grown into a strange position by forces beyond my control. My father ruined my life, whether intentionally or not. My circumstances ruined my life. I never had to... And I could have really been something. But every time I got to be successful, something happened to spoil it. Almost as though there was something inside of me that says, no, you're too sick to deserve feeling good. And it started to rain, so I walked 71 blocks out to an AA club that I'd been asked to leave the week before for being in there drunk and fighting. And I hung around that club, and I don't suppose I ever felt much worse. I felt as bad as I felt on that ship in Pearl Harbor when they were laughing at me. I felt almost the same thing, just absolute despair and hopelessness and no way out. And not only that, but this club was full of the worst type of AA people that intellectual people can be around, and they're called AA fanatics. God, they're a ghastly crew. You know, I was rather sophisticated by this time, and I realized I had to do what I had to do to get by, and so I'd tell some of these people a story that should prompt them to offer me help, for Christ's sake. You know, I've lost my family, and I've lost my home, and I have no money. I'm not even eating, and I have no place to stay, and I want the program, but I don't know if I'll be able to stay because I'm not able to eat or sleep. Now that's a pretty clear invitation, isn't it? And they say things like, well, go to a lot of meetings, work the steps, get a sponsor, it'll all get better. And I wound up sleeping in an abandoned car back of the AA club and hanging around that club and listening to these dreary pukes. And I never felt any worse. And yet, shortly thereafter I began to feel worse. One of the things that helped bring it about is that they said then the same thing they say now. Get a sponsor, get a sponsor. So I got a sponsor. I'd seen this guy in the movies. He played a character actor. I always played loving husband or uncles and so on. And I thought maybe he'll love me enough to buy me some front teeth and give me a few bucks. But he should have won the Academy Award for every loving role he ever played, because he wasn't like that. And he would just grind me, and I was trying, you I tell you! And these fanatics around me making me crazy. And I began to do something that was worse than anything I had ever done. I look back now. I had been up and I'd been down, and I'd been up and I'd been down. But the one thing I had never done, I had never sold out my integrity. Whatever little integrity I had, I maintained that. I never became a hypocrite. I never became a phony. If you want to know what I felt, I told you. And now these people were grinding me to become a hypocrite and a phony, to take actions that I thought were stupid, to say things that I didn't believe. And they found me, and I was so desperate, I found myself piece by piece beginning to sell out what little integrity I had left, of saying things just to get by, of doing things that I thought were stupid just to get by, of pretending to be interested in things that I thought I hated just to get by. And little by little, the last vestige of whatever self-worth I had went down the toilet, piece by piece. It made me feel so bad, almost suicidal. And the odd thing about it is, in looking back now, I now can see that is when my recovery started. That's the hardest thing to understand about this program, that the recovery starts when you surrender what you know to be true. Surrender it, your perception of truth. And little by little, I didn't know I was getting better. And little by little, it was painful, but I survived somehow. And this sponsor would take advantage of me, it seemed to me. And I could look back and see how he took advantage of me, because it's the same way many sponsors still do. And it's the same way. You got to understand the premise here. I want to talk a few minutes to the new people. The old people know this, but I want to explain, because you'll have to understand what I'm talking about. Is that tonight, I said I was an alcoholic when I got up here. Now you may wonder, how did I become an alcoholic? Because I was an alcoholic when I drank, and I was an alcoholic when I got sober, and I haven't drank since. Because I've learned here that I'm an alcoholic. And I'll tell you how I learned I'm an alcoholic. The one thing that always kept me from being an alcoholic was my knowledge that alcohol is not really my number one problem. Now I thought, how do you overcome that, even if you want to? And I'm glad that I stayed in AA long enough and survived and allowed myself to have my integrity stripped from me to discover the most important single thing I have ever learned. And it is thus this: if my problem is alcohol, I am not an alcoholic. Or in other words, if I'm an alcoholic, my problem is not and cannot be alcohol. Now, doesn't that sound weird and upside down? But most people here, I'm sure, know it, has been sober a while, but you people who are new, I'm sure that boggles your mind. You say, of course the problem is alcohol. I can disprove that in 10 seconds. If alcohol is the problem, detoxes turn out recovered people. And they don't. Treatment centers turn out recovered people. Hospitals turn out recovered people. They don't. They turn out people who are physically sober with varying amounts of information what may be wrong with them. But I'll guarantee you, if they be like me, and I presume like you if you're here, newcomer, unless something dramatic happens after that, sooner or later, they must always eventually drink or sedate. Well, if the problem isn't alcohol, what the hell is it? Something mysterious, like one of these therapies on television, or the inner child where you have to buy another book or go to another class and pay some more money? No. It's something you already know. But if you are like me, your preconception of the word may be so strong it blots out what it means. The problem here is not alcohol. It is something called alcoholism. You may think, well, it's the same thing. Alcoholism, not the same thing. Tremendous difference. If you are like me, I will guarantee you the day will come when your sanity and life will depend on remembering the difference. So what are the differences? Well, there's a lot of them. A lot of differences. But for the sake of argument, let's just say the number one difference is this. An alcohol problem is overcome by getting sober and cleaning up your act. However, in this strange, denigrating, mind-destroying, emotional, halcyon, this fatal thing called alcoholism, you will discover sooner or later, if you haven't discovered it yet, that stopping drinking and cleaning up your act has no significant long-term effect on your life other than to gradually make it so painful that you cannot stand it. That is what makes alcoholism a fatal disease, newcomer. The pain of sobriety will eventually always get more intense than the memory of the pain of drinking. and the alcoholic must always eventually drink again. The book says there comes to be a point at which there is no adequate defense against the first drink for people like me, and I presume like you. So you understand that getting sober is not going to make you better. It's the preliminary to getting better, but it's not getting better. It's the doorway. Now, what do sponsors do about this? Here's what it is. I was thinking today, coming in on an airplane, coming into Dallas on a jet, pulls you along at 550 miles an hour. You land in Dallas Fort Worth Airport, and the plane stops. They have no big brakes. I guess they just reverse the thrust of those jets, and they slow it down. They stop it. Then they put on some little brakes. They just change the thrust of the direction. And in a sense, that is what Alcoholics Anonymous, the guidance of people here, can do for you as they did for me. What they really do, in effect, they take the pain that ensures I must drink, and if I will let them, they can change the direction of that thrust and use that same pain to make me take actions that will save my life. The actions I would never take except for the motivation of that terrible destructive pain. The same thing, the changing of the thrust. And it must be done in order to, little by little, what? You're only going to get so sober. When you're 30 days, you're never going to get any more sober than you are right now. Baloney on all these stories where it takes a year to get alcohol out of your system. It's out of your system in 30 days. What must happen is something that has never been effective in the history of mankind. Someone must take a sober alcoholic and little by little alter his perception of reality, or he must drink. And it's done sometimes by intimidation. It's hard to believe that. I know I had told my sponsor, I will never write an inventory in AA because I've taken my inventory with a psychiatrist. Why take it with an out-of-work actor? You know, it doesn't even make sense. And he got cross about that, as he always did. But the day I got fired as a dishwasher when I was 6 months sober, and I realized I can't even hold a job as a dishwasher. I am nothing. And I decided to kill myself. I'd rather be dead than be like this. I don't know of a person in the world who cares about me, and I might as well be dead. And I was going to walk in the ocean. Because I always like to be dramatic. Whatever, even if I'm committing suicide, I want to do it with a little éclat. And I walked and walked and walked. I couldn't find the damn ocean. I finally stopped at a gas station and said, "Where's the ocean?" The guy said, "Well, you're in the western end of Beverly Hills. It's about got to go past the Veterans Hospital, about another 3 miles." I thought, screw that. You know, I don't mind dying, but I'm not going to walk myself to death. So I called up my sponsor, and I hated to call him because I'd been fired, and now he didn't like to hear bad news. He did not like to hear bad news. I thought, I'll tell him a story that's so sad. I used to be a good writer. I'll tell him a story that touches his heart. And he'll say, "I misjudged you, son. I'm coming over to help you." I said, "Oh, Bob, this is Clancy." He says, "Why don't you work out?" "Just a minute, Bob. Let me tell you, you know that I've lost my family. It's all right. I'm living intermittently in an abandoned car, sometimes on people's sofas, sometimes in an abandoned car. And I'm getting nowhere, and I've got jobs as dishwasher and furniture movers, and I can't even do those right. But Bob, I'm not complaining about that. What you don't seem to understand is this. When you're not around, even in Alcoholics Anonymous, where I go to meetings every night, as you say, because there's nothing else to do, I didn't want to say that. But they treat me different in AA. Even in AA, I am not welcome. When I come in, I go into the club and sit down with somebody, have a cup of coffee, and they sooner or later get up and go to a different table. People never call on me in participation meetings. People act funny to me. Old-timers tell their newcomers to stay away from me. It's just, "Bob, I'm a smart guy. I used to be something. But Bob, you don't understand. AA is not trying to help me." And it suddenly struck me, this is true. Gosh, the worst thing I could think of was true. And I don't know what it did for him, but it made me burst into tears. I said, Bob, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And he said, why don't you write your inventory the way I told you? And what a stupid answer. And I didn't say anything, but I wanted to say, why don't you? I forget what it was, but it would have been fun to watch him try it. I said, Bob, in my judgment, that's the last thing in the world I need. For God's sakes, I'm so full of guilt and fear and despair. In my judgment, that can't help. My loving sponsor said, in your judgment? Who cares about your judgment? You live in the back seat of an abandoned car, for Christ's sake. If I wanted your judgment, I'd put my head in the window and ask you for it. We're using my judgment. You got to surrender that judgment. You got to surrender that judgment. And he made me, if I'd have had the money, I would have called the World Service office in New York, and I would have turned that old bastard in. I really would have. I could just visualize it. I just wanted to know there's an old timer in Los Angeles killing newcomers. And I'll give you his name and address. Now it's a lot different. Now it's almost 35 years later. When I talk to the World Service office in New York, I say, no, I'm not. But that day I took an inventory. He used that thrust of that pain to make me take an inventory that I bet I'd never take. And a week later, he directed some pain, and I took a fifth step. And he had me do the sixth and seventh step little by little. We started off with my amends by me making amends to my father, the man who had ruined my life. And I said, Bob, you must be crazy. He ruined my life. He said, maybe he did, but you were a rotten son too. We're only concerned about your end of it. Let him worry about his own problems. And over a period of time, oddly enough, through a series of things, I wish I had a long time to talk about it, my father and I, in a few years, became close. Remember the last 20 years of his life, we were closer than most fathers and sons I knew, because it turned out my perception of things was not correct. But I'd have bet my life it was. And when he died in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, I was sitting by his bedside holding his hand, and he smiled and died, and I thought to myself, isn't that nice? And 3 days later, we sat in the Norwich Lutheran Church, almost this big, with a little casket. I thought, isn't that nice? Because I was driven by pain, I came to be a good friend to my father, and I came to understand that God does not have a Norwegian accent and is sending me to hell. But the same God is in this church, is in my meeting in West Los Angeles. The God who loves me. If I could just get my head out of my butt long enough to take the things I'm supposed to do, I'll get along fine. And the reason I mention that is because, stop and think about this. If I would have maintained that momentarily comfortable victimization role to this very night, if someone would come up to me and said, tell us about your father, I'd have had to say, that dirty son of a bitch ruined my life, and I hope he's rotting in hell. And my gut would churn. But someone says to me, how was your father? I said, he was a good man, and I'm glad we had a good life. And I sleep well. And that's the difference between victimization and recovery, I think. But little by little, I took the steps of AA. And I started to get better. And I began to realize the other end of alcoholism. And if you're new tonight, let me again tell you that. Having an unsatisfactory sobriety it's only half of it. You must also be one of the 6 or 7% of people who, without ever knowing it, get an unnatural reaction to alcohol. And you may wonder what this, they call it an allergy of the body, a sensitivity of the body. What is this unnatural reaction? Makes you stay drunk all the time? Nah. People talk about staying drunk around the clock 25 years. You can't stay drunk 14 straight days and nights. Can't handle it? False. Alcoholics handle alcohol better than social drinkers in any kind of a test. Makes you act crazy? Some people do, some people don't. I see people die today from alcoholism who've never acted crazy once. Then what is it? It is something that we take for granted so entirely that you wouldn't ever believe it was an unnatural reaction. But only people like you and me know it. Alcohol must have the power to almost instantly make everything all right. Now we just take that for granted. I never knew it till I was sober a while. Could I come to believe it doesn't do that for most people. That's why they don't drink. As my sponsor said to me clearly, and among other times, remember this, kid? To them it goes blah, blah, blah. To you and me it goes boom. That's why we're here and they're not. I said, it doesn't sound right to me, Bob. I don't know why you got so cross with me all the time. But that is really the thing. If you want to know if you're an alcoholic, you can read the 20 questions. You can read, there's a book, 40 questions. You can read the 5,000-page Hazelden book. But I can give you a quick test. Think of it this way. In your life, when you've had terrible, rotten days, and everything's gone to hell, and the hounds of fate are ripping at your throat, somebody says, here, take a drink. And you take a drink. Do you really want it to go blah, 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 blah? Oh, no more for me. I'm starting to feel it. That's the way most people are. And if that's what you are, you don't have to go to A anymore. You can go to Kmart tonight and see what's on. You know? But if you are like me, when your back's to the wall and the hounds of fate ripping at your throat, somebody says, here, take a drink. It doesn't go blah, blah, blah. It goes You want to try me, copper? Hey, Mr. Carlson, you know that job I worked 6 months to get? Shove it. You with anyone, Granny? Alcohol must have the power to alter your perception of reality. And that's what it's all about here, new guy and new girl, and people who may have forgotten it. The reason we stay active is because it keeps our perceptions changed. Over a period of time, what does alcohol do for you? Alcoholics Anonymous gets you sober and sober and sober? Ridiculous. I'll tell you what it does based on my experience when I knew it could not do it. I was not starry. I didn't even want to stay sober when I got sober. And there were several times in my life I haven't even wanted to stay sober. I've just done it years ago to please my sponsor sometimes. Alcoholics Anonymous, I should say, does very slowly what alcohol does fast. That's all. Very slowly. For example, it takes a person like me and who's lived most of his life knowing he's not enough. And most of the time today, I feel like I'm enough. Sometimes I don't, but it turns out no human being feel like they're enough all the time. That's part of being a human being. Negative feelings are part of being a human being. That isn't some terrible sickness. That's part of being a human being. Most of the time, I feel like I'm enough. It takes a person like me who lives with fear all the time. Most of the time today, I'm fearless. I find myself going down in alleys in Skid Row where the police cars are afraid to go, and doing what I have to do. But sometimes I get afraid. I hear a noise in the night and I get afraid. My heart beats. Who can tell? Because that's part of being a human being. It takes a person like me who's been rejected with my feelings hurt nearly all the time, and most of the time today, I don't have my feelings hurt and I don't feel rejected. Sometimes I do because I'm a human being. But that's part of the process here. That's why you can't allow yourself the dreadful luxury of saying, I'm sober, why don't I feel better? The natural state of untreated sober alcoholism is growing anxiety and depression and pain. And that's why people like you and me must continue to surrender, to allow forces beyond our control to steer that pain, to make us continue to take the actions that keep my perception straight. Alcoholism is truly a disease of perception. And you stay active, and I stay active, and I try to do what I'm supposed to do, and I try to be a good example to the people behind me. I'm not a wonderful man. John said he wasn't a wonderful man. I'm not a wonderful man. Sometimes people say, I don't think you walk all the time like you talk. And that may be true. But you can thank God I don't walk the way I think. Yeah. Probably the best example, I don't want to close now, because I know one of you want to get dancing and see if you can cop a little feel there while we're talking about God at the meeting. I don't judge. I remember having those feelings. I heard a guy say the other night, it's been so long since I've had sex, I can't remember who gets tied up. Guy with my voice, too, now that I think about it. Anyway. But, about 30 years ago, I wanted to be secretary of a meeting. I was about 5 years sober. I wanted to be secretary of a meeting. And I got a guy to nominate me to be secretary of the Brentwood meeting. And the nomination died for lack of a second. I didn't really have a big lot of support. I was a smart mouth and without being old enough to justify it. And so in the little meeting hall over there called Ohio Street, the Tuesday night meeting had died. They said, there's a meeting, you start. And I said, okay. And I started meeting. I got 8 weary followers, and I started this meeting. I wrote a format, still use the same format that last Wednesday night. I wrote that very same day in 1963. And we had 8 members. We had a speaker come, and there's only 8 of us listening. But the next week there were 12, and the next week there were about 18. And then I offended a lot of people with my announcements, and there were 8 again. And it's just, I've never been very sensitive, I'm afraid. But at the end of a year, we must have had about 40 people coming regularly. Not all of us the same 40, but there were usually 40. And I thought, God, this is great. Bigger than some of the meetings already, just a year. Meetings have an election after a year, but I thought, these people are just coming along now. God, if they had the election, they could elect the wrong person and it would all go to hell. I'll sacrifice myself and I'll be secretary for another year. I just won't mention the election. I thought it was pretty noble of me. So I was the secretary for another year. And at the end of the second year, we had about 70 people, 75 people. And I thought, oh man, this is it. They're all so close to self-determination, like an emerging African nation, but they're not quite there. So I thought I'll just be secretary a while longer, just till we get it. And a couple of months later, some boo-by sponsor comes and says, are we ever going to have an election? And I said, well, don't you think I'm doing a good job? Is that what's wrong? I said, no, but people in other groups say, don't you ever have an election? If we had an election and we elected you, then they couldn't say anything, because we've had an election. I said, that's a good thought. And we had an election, and I was swept out of office. Just, there's no gratitude, ever. But I had done such a good job of foundation that even though I left, the group really took off then. And that's my perception, and I'm stuck with it. Now, it's the biggest meeting in the world. 1,200 people every Wednesday night. A lot of you people have been to it. Some of you people have been to it. 1,200 people. You've been there, haven't you, Ron? And I'm the founder. And I sit there, give little directions. Nobody pays any attention, but it makes me feel good. At the end of the meeting, I stand in the back where the people are lined up to thank the speaker. I stand there. I try to be a good example of a founder. People bring their newcomers up. Say, this is Clancy. He speaks all over the world, and he's the founder of this group, and he's been sober many years. Hello there. Welcome to our meeting. I hope you brought your problems tonight. Many folks leave them here. It's very nice. Sometimes diabetics go into a coma, but but once in a great while, some boob will come up who doesn't know who I am. Will say something like, hey, buddy, can you give me your ride back over to the VA psycho ward? And the nice thing about AA is today, just like it was 35 years ago, just like it was 10 years ago, it's exactly the same lessons I learned from my sponsor. I can think whatever I want to. I can look right into the beady eyes of this little puke and think, what? For God's sakes, there are 1,200 people here who need action desperately. There's one who has been drained dry for over a third of a century. Give, give, give. That's all I know, for God's sakes. Get somebody else to give you a ride. I'm not just some guy standing back here looking good. I'm Clancy I from up in the sky. I'm a big man in AA. Now you can think that as long as you say, okay. And the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous is, after I drop that puke off at the VA hospital, as I drive home, my head says, "Oh, Clancy, is there no end to your goodness?" So if you are new tonight, or weary, or not doing the things you're supposed to do, let someone steer that pain. Get back to taking the actions. Find yourself with a little degree of self-worth that blossoms little by little. The only thing that has ever worked for people like you and me. Because Alcoholics Anonymous is not really a meeting. It's not the book. It's not any of these things. These are all helps to Alcoholics Anonymous. What Alcoholics Anonymous is just the same thing it was June 10th, 1935. One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to help him feel less different, at least enough, so that he will begin to take actions he does not yet believe in. He will make this surrender. He will surrender his intellectual integrity. He will allow his pain to be steered until he comes to realize that he can walk with some degree of dignity. When I went to my first meeting in Big Spring Hospital, I hadn't been to a meeting in Texas yet, and I was just off shock. And, you know, they do the same in West Texas. You do a version of it here, but they do it a little more out there. I just heard this guy, you know, most of the country, they say, "My name is Fred and I'm an alcoholic." And I was standing there kind of goofy, and I heard some guy say, "My name is Fred and I'm an alcoholic. And through the grace of God and the power of this simple program, it's not been necessary for me to drink any alcohol or take any mind-sedating or tranquilizing medications since my sobriety date. And for this I am truly grateful." And they all said, "Hi, Fred." And I guess that's all right, but when you're just off shock treatments, yeah. And when I heard that a few times, I thought to myself, if I ever get to be sober, if I ever got to be a position of power, I would tell him the truth. I wouldn't tell him that kind of crap. And I'm in a position tonight where I can tell you the truth. Now I want to tell you what I've learned in the last 34 years and a half. Here's what I've learned. I've learned I'm an alcoholic. So I can say my name is Clancy Immisland and I'm an alcoholic. And here's what else I've learned. I've learned that through the grace of God and the power of this simple program, it has not been necessary for me to drink any alcohol or take any mind-sedating or tranquilizing medications since October the 31st, 1958. And for this, I am truly grateful. Thank you.
To start this thing off, y'all, let's have a moment of silence and followed by a serenity prayer. Serenity prayer.